Thank you very much, Mercedes, and thank you for inviting me to be here today. It's a very interesting topic to talk about youth employability, but also how youth can be employed using the wide description of the word employed or deployed or used in that sense. Of course, when we talk about the future and opportunities and trends, unfortunately, I cannot move away from talking to you about COVID and restrictions on lockdowns and all the hassle that came along with it. So I'm sorry for that. I know the last thing we're waiting for here is to hear again about how challenging COVID was for all of us. But I will give it a positive turn. So as you know, over the past years, youth have disproportionately lost jobs. They disproportionately lost their education opportunities. They've suffered from isolation, from mental health issues, and they were overall very vulnerable. But despite this vulnerability, they were not taken care of sufficiently by governments and decision makers. So I really like this quote that I put on the screen, that authorities ask young people and youth to make significant sacrifices during the pandemic without having taken into account their needs and intentions, nor having the possibility that their voice led to government actions. So what I want to present to you today, however, is that the pandemic also had positive impacts, and it has created a lot of opportunities for youth in different ways. Next slide, please. A survey in the UK among youth has demonstrated that for most of youth, the best way for them to deal with these negative effects of lockdown was to engage themselves into activities that they find meaningful. So anything that contributes to the community, to climate change, to raising awareness for human rights online, etc. And what we've seen around Europe is quite amazing, I would say. We've seen that youth were directly involved in their community, getting groceries for the elderly, organizing activities for children of essential workers, producing masks, etc. Even the students became the teachers when they helped university teachers how to deal with digital tools in education. So we've really seen that in this time of hardship, youth stepped up and created opportunities and contributed to their society. Next slide, please. And of course, as we know, during COVID, there was an increasing reliance on everything being digital. And this also applied to youth, but also youth work. So youth organizations try to find alternatives to face-to-face activities through online exhibitions, online sports challenges, webinars, exchanges, etc. But also youth themselves could not be stopped, where youth may have been volunteers in the community. In case of complete lockdown, they went online, they had Zoom meetings, they had virtual youth cafes, etc. Like what we basically saw is that youth and youth organizations were highly innovative in finding ways to continue with their work, despite the fact that actually a lot of youth organizations lost funding, got projects delayed, etc. So this is, in my opinion, highly commendable. So what does this actually mean for employability? So from my perspective, the employability kind of has two different meanings. On the one hand, you can say, okay, employability of youth more passively is we look at youth as a group of people that needs to be integrated in the labor market. And of course, that's true. On the other hand, what we see with all these amazing opportunities and innovations coming from youth themselves is that youth can also be employed as a resource to help societies recover from the pandemic. And as you're probably aware, there are a lot of countries who have developed their recovery strategies. EU also has recovery strategies, and they're all focusing on green solutions, inclusive solutions. And these are exactly the topics that we've seen that youth are engaged in. Youth are interested in things that contribute to society. So everything post post-COVID recovery is something that we need to get youth on the forefront of, not passively because they need to be integrated, but actively because they are a resource that we can use. Next slide, please. And there are different ways in which we can actually achieve this, because everything, of course, as I said before, has turned digital. So the ICT skills that youth kind of predominantly possess, together with this wish to contribute meaningfully to society, enable youth to volunteer and to work worldwide. For example, I was a UN online volunteer on several occasions because I couldn't go out and contribute to the community. But there are also opportunities for youth to engage in different types of work. I don't know if you're familiar with the term online platform work, but we're thinking here about websites where youth can register as freelancers, to getting engaged in translations or graphic design, etc. Because we see that not only that we see that basically the world is also changing and there are new skills needed. We see that we're doing more work online. I mean, most of my colleagues have not returned to the office. So we know that this online work is possible. And we know that youth have the skills that are needed to kind of engage in this new type of labor market. And on the slide, I presented some of the main opportunities that this digitalization and this new labor market, new environment can offer to youth. So which is basically employment opportunities based on ICT skills. But we also see that since youth have engaged more in these online activities, it's easier for them to connect with other youth, also across borders. We see increased participation in virtual mobility, so accessing education, volunteering, and work-related activities across the border. And of course, digital tools like Zoom can enhance the participation of youth in discussions with decision makers. Next slide, please. So basically, the message that I wanted to give to you today is that we need to also kind of reconsider not just passively how can we increase employment for youth, but also what is youth employability? How can we use youth as a resource in a way that it creates both employment opportunities for them, but to create these opportunities for youth and involve youth in a way that we have a green and inclusive post-COVID-19 recovery. And in this sense, what remains to be done, mainly for policymakers, is to recognize this resource. So instead of the earlier quote I showed, ignoring youth, actually recognizing the potential that youth has to innovate, to contribute, and then find these and stimulate these employment opportunities and funding schemes that can help youth to reach their full potential and simultaneously support post-COVID-19 recovery. Thank you very much.